Sekiro stands out for me not only because of its combat, but because of its world. Its atmosphere, visual design and subtle storytelling are what make it unforgettable long after the fights are over. Most people approach Sekiro expecting brutal difficulty, precise parrying and punishing bosses. That is a reputation. That is what I expected too. But then something unexpected happens. The moment I've spent in game around 30–60 minutes, I paused just for a second, and suddenly combat disappeared from my mind. I was just standing there looking. To be honest, I finished Sekiro for the first time just because it was one of the most visual and atmospherically powerful worlds ever created, not because I've enjoyed dying again and again from Lady Butterfly or Guardian Ape. The most impressive thing Sekiro does is that it never demands your attention. It doesn't force cinematic moments, it doesn't lock your camera into dramatic angles, it doesn't pause the action to show you something important. It simply exists and lets you notice it on your own. And that is exactly why it works. I remember moving through Senpou Temple for the first time. I was focused, cautious, expecting enemies at every turn, but at some point I just stopped. Not because of danger, but because environment itself pulled me out of that mindset. It didn't feel like a game level anymore, it felt like a place. There is very specific balance Sekiro maintains. Calm but never safe, quiet but never empty, beautiful but always slightly unsettling. And that contrast creates tension without needing combat. You are not just reacting to enemies, you are reacting to the space itself. That is why the world stays with you. It doesn't interrupt gameplay, it integrates into it so naturally that you almost don't realize it's happening. There are plenty of games that look good, but the Sekiro feels composed. Every area isn't just designed, it feels intended, like it was built around a single, clear visual identity. Take Sunken Valley. It's not just cliffs and verticality, it's scale, openness, exposure. The way the space stretches out in front of you makes you feel small in a way that very few games achieve. You're not just navigating it, you're experiencing it. Every location feels like it belongs to the same world, but still has its own identity. Temples feel different from valleys. Valleys feel different from fields, but nothing feels disconnected. And that consistency is what makes the experience stick. You're not remembering isolated moments, you're remembering a world that felt whole. If you stripped Sekiro down to just visuals, it would still be impressive, but it won't feel the game. Because the sound design is doing something just as important, and it's doing it quietly. There is almost always something in the background. Wind moving through trees, distant echoes, subtle ambient tones, no loud, no distracting, just present. And that presence matters. It makes the world feel like it's breathing. I didn't notice it at first. It's not the kind of thing you actively pay attention to. But when you stop moving, when you pause and just exist in the space, that is when it becomes clear. The silence isn't empty, it is filled with details, and that creates immersion without effort. Most games either go completely quiet or rely too heavily on music to carry emotion. Sekiro sits perfectly in between. That is why even simple moments like standing still, looking around, feel meaningful. You are not waiting for something to happen, you're already inside something that feels complete. Sekiro doesn't aim for realism, it aims for cohesion. Everything feels like it belongs. I noticed it more the longer I played. The transition between areas never felt abrupt. The shifts in tone from calm to unsettling, from natural to surreal, always felt intentional. Nothing felt random. Even the smaller details reinforced that feeling. Ruined structures that hint at history, hidden paths that reward curiosity, unexpected viewpoints that make you stop and rethink where you are. It gives you the feeling that this world exists beyond your path through it, and that changes how you interact with it. You're not just moving forward because the game tells you to. You're exploring because you want to understand the space. That is when the game stops feeling like a challenge and starts feeling like a place. Of course, Sekiro's combat is excellent, there is no question about that. It's precise, demanding and deeply satisfying once it clicks. But here is the thing. Combat is what may bring you into the game if you're a Souls-like fan, for example. But the world is what stays with you after you leave it, because difficulty fades. You learn patterns, you improve, you overcome challenges, and eventually those moments become familiar. But the feeling of standing in a place that genuinely surprised you, that doesn't fade in the same way. I can say that I remember specific locations even more clearly than specific fights. Not because the fights weren't good, but because the world left a strong impression. That is what separates a technically great game from a memorable one. Sekiro doesn't just test your skill, it creates moments that stay with you long after you've finished playing. And those moments are built through atmosphere, through restraint, through design, through everything the game chooses not to over-explain. So if you think about Sekiro as that hard game with great combat, you're only seeing part of what makes it special. Because in the end, the combat is what you play, the world is what you carry with you. Thanks for watching, hit that like button and subscribe for more Sekiro Shadows Die Twice guides and lore videos, and stay sharp out there, Shinobi.